Hello everyone. Today's topic is transfer and transmission of shares. We know that one of the main advantages of a company is that its members can transfer their shares. Section 44 of the Companies Act 2013 states that shares of a company are movable property and can be transferred in a manner provided by the Articles of Association of a company. Section 58, subsection 2 of the Companies Act says that the shares of a public company shall be freely transferable, and any contract or arrangement between two or more persons in respect of transfer of securities of a public company shall be enforceable as a contract. Now we move on to the meaning of transfer of shares. The term transfer of shares means a transfer by sale by the registered holder of the shares. Let us now discuss the procedure of transfer of shares. The first procedure: instrument of transfer in prescribed form. Transfer of shares can be done by executing an instrument of transfer, that is, transfer deed, in a prescribed form, form number SH4. Dated. The instrument of transfer must be dated. Stamped. The instrument of transfer must be duly stamped. Delivery to the company. The instrument of transfer must be delivered to the company for registration by the transferor or transferee. Delivery period. It must be delivered to the company within a period of 60 days from the date of its execution. Next procedure: registration of transfer of shares. The transfer of shares is then registered by the company, and on registration, the transferee becomes the member of the company. Now we move on to the next term, that is transmission of shares. Let us discuss the meaning of transmission of shares. The term transmission of shares means transfer of shares by the operation of law. The transmission of shares takes place on the death of the registered shareholder, on the insolvency of the shareholder, or on the lunacy of the member. Lunacy means insanity. On the death of the registered shareholder, the shares are transmitted to his nominee or executor or successor. On the insolvency of the member, the shares are transmitted to the official receiver or assignee appointed by the court. Or on the lunacy of a member, the shares are transmitted to the administrator appointed by the court or to his legal representative or guardian. Let us now move on to the difference between transfer of shares and transmission of shares. The first difference is based on reason. Transfer of share is a voluntary act of the parties, whereas transmission of share is not a voluntary act of the parties. It takes place by operation of law, that is, on the death or insolvency of the shareholder. The next difference is based on contract. In case of transfer of shares, there is a contract between the transferor and the transferee, whereas transmission of shares takes place without any contract. The third difference is based on formalities. Many legal formalities have to be followed in case of transfer of shares. But only certain documents are required to be submitted in case of transmission of shares. The next difference is based on transfer deed. In case of transfer of shares, transfer deed is necessary for the purpose of transferring the shares from one person to another. But in case of transmission of shares, transfer deed is not required. Only a letter of request to the company is sufficient. The next difference is based on consideration. Consideration is required in case of transfer of shares. Consideration means something in return, while in case of transmission of shares, consideration is not required. The sixth difference between transfer of shares and transmission of shares is based on stamp duty. In case of transfer of shares, transfer deed must be duly stamped. No such stamp duty is required in case of transmission of shares. The last difference is based on restrictions. A company may, by its articles of association, impose certain restrictions on the transfer of shares. But a company cannot impose restrictions on transmission of shares. In this video, I shared with you the meaning of transfer of shares, the meaning of transmission of shares, procedure of transfer of shares, and the difference between transfer of shares and transmission of shares. That's all for today. Thank you very much for watching and listening.